Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This is one of the 3 videos that I will be making to kind of bookend the end of the year. In case you are new here, or whoops, as I knock over my stack of books. In case you're new here, or you missed one of my earlier announcements, I am actually going to be having a baby later this month, and so I'm taking some time off from my regular YouTube uploads to attend to that and to bond with my newborn. So you will be seeing some pre-recorded stuff from me throughout the month of December. But this is going to be my reading wrap up for the month of November 2025. Today I have 7 books to talk to you about. Surprisingly, actually, a lot of these were group reads. That wasn't intentional. That was just kind of the way that this shook out. I did some book club reads, some buddy reads, formally and informally. And I also have one craft project to share with you. So let's go ahead and do that. I have been kind of crocheting up a storm because at this point of the pregnancy, we're just at a really physically difficult and trying time for me, not just because of the pregnancy, but also because of some underlying, disability related stuff that's interacting with the pregnancy and the change in temperature and air pressure. So I'm spending a lot of time just trying to rest in a, reclined position. And that means that, to stop myself from getting too much cabin fever, I've been doing a lot of crochet. So I have been trying to make my way through my yarn stash that I have had since I started crocheting back in 2018, 2019. The classic thing that all new crocheters do, which is buy yarn without having a project in mind for it, just because it looks pretty. And I'm mostly done with making projects out of those skeins, but I did a little one skein beanie out of this little Lion brand. I believe this is a fully synthetic yarn, and I found a free pattern on the website just because I thought it would be fun. It's a little bizarre. It's got kind of this square piece that then goes out into just rows of double crochet, so not super sure how I feel about that. Also, I have a loose end that appears to need weaving back in, despite the fact that I thought I took care of that already. But anyway, this hat's really cute. I love the colors, and I have enjoyed wearing it as the temperatures drop. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with some fiction books and then get into the nonfiction next, in no particular order. Okay, let's start with a book I really loved reading this month, and that is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monocle Black Goose. This is a book that came recommended to me by my friend Noor, who did this as a book club with their members on Ko-fi. And this is a story about dragons, and in particular, this young woman named AnnaG, who is indigenous to this world. It is a fantasy world that's original, but it is kind of very heavily based off of the New England area in the United States. And the author herself is part of the Wampanoag tribe, which is from the Massachusetts area up here. Anyways, AnnaG winds up finding a dragon's egg and bonding with the hatchling after there has been a couple hundred years, I think, of the dragons dying off, basically in parallel to the colonization that's happened here. So this is the first dragon that has hatched here, and she becomes Nampeshueshit, which is the word for basically being chosen by the dragon as a companion. Because the government in the area is run by colonial authorities, they have really different both cultural and legal ideas about who should have access to dragons and how things need to be registered. So she winds up having to enroll in this English dragon school on the mainland, because otherwise the authorities have decided that they are going to take the dragon away from her. And kill it, basically. So it's interesting because it's not quite a parallel with the things like residential schools. Again, hesitate to really call them schools because they were just places where children were abused and killed under the guise of education. But it definitely has some parallels with that, where there's a lot of pressure on her to assimilate into the colonial English culture. And this book is not just about her bonding with her dragon and learning about how they will shape the dragon's breath to do magic, but it's also about her finding her identity and figuring out how she is going to not compromise on who she is, not give up the essential parts of her culture that her professors and a lot of her classmates are telling her she needs to in order to become like a dragon rider. I didn't realize when I started reading this that this is going to be a series. I probably should have noticed that it said the first book of Nampeshiwesit on the front, but I didn't, and I think the new book comes out early next year. The second book that I have to share with you, unfortunately, I didn't really care for. It was the pick for my book club's genre book club, and it's, I think, marketed as kind of a literary thriller. I kind of disagree with that designation, but anyway, that book is North Country by Matt Bondurant. On the surface, this really seemed like a book I was going to enjoy. It's set in the North Country, which is the sort of upstate New York area that's on the border with Canada, and we follow the sort of misadventures, really, of a bunch of people living in this small fictional town up near Plattsburgh. If you're familiar with upstate New York, it's basically Plattsburgh, but fictionalized. And in particular, we follow our main character, Kaiser, who is sort of your typical noirish anti-hero. He has like a tragic past. He returns to this town where he grew up and kind of gets enmeshed in the criminal underworld there. A lot of the plot revolves around drug smuggling, and there's a lot of like ecstasy crossing the border between the US and Canada in this book. But there's also definitely like the rot at the heart of this town that is decaying because industry has kind of evaporated. The major employer in the town is this prison. These sort of deaths of despair for things like alcoholism, drug overdose, etc. are incredibly common. And really, I think where this book succeeds is in capturing the overall ambiance of the place, and also the writing about nature and about, Lake Champlain and this sort of mysterious, unfathomable lake that might as well be like a huge inland sea, and how terrifying it is that people can just go under the ice and be lost forever there. Unfortunately, I did not really find this book to be particularly compelling as a read. The plot was a very slow burn of an on-ramp that didn't then have much action until the very end, when a whole lot of stuff happens really quickly. And I was not really a fan of how some of the characters' stories were wrapped up. Some of the really important characters were just completely killed or, written out of the story off page. There were things that happened that just were so bonkers that they didn't really seem to make sense with the rest of the story. So I felt that the pacing was kind of uneven. And I also think that like some of the characters, like Kaiser, the main character, were pretty well developed, but others, particularly the female characters, kind of weren't. Especially the female characters only really existed in some parts to just make motivation for male characters, either because they needed to be rescued or because they needed to provide that more like being a morally good contrast to a morally gray anti-hero. Yes, some of that is kind of endemic to the noir genre, but I didn't like how it was portrayed in this book. I get tired of that. It's very tiresome to read female characters that are written in that particular way. But I still thought that the writing of the book was good. I think it was just a mismatch in taste. So like I didn't enjoy it, but I know a lot of other people at the book club liked it more than I did. So yeah, give it a shot if you're interested, but otherwise it's not a huge recommend from me. Let's see. I read this next book solo. This was actually a reread that I read in like an afternoon. I've been going to my local thrift store a lot recently, particularly to look over their books because they have a lot of really great books, particularly in their kids section. And I always look for stuff like that for like classroom or story time or just like various other kids literacy stuff I've been involved in. But I happened upon a gigantic treasure trove of books by Andrew Clements, who was like my favorite author, bar none, in middle school. He wrote a lot of like realistic middle grade fiction about kids in school going through experiencing normal kids stuff. And so I picked up a ton of them because they were all like half off. So I was paying maybe 75 cents per book, and it was just too good to pass up. So this one was The Last Holiday Concert, which I believe came out in 2004. So I was like right at the target age for reading that. I was 10 when this came out. And this is a story about a very popular boy who has just started middle school. His name is Hart Evans. He's the most popular kid in 6th grade, and he's kind of used to relying on his like charm and charisma to get him out of trouble. But one day he's flicking rubber bands in the classroom, and one of them accidentally hits his chorus teacher in the neck, and the teacher just loses it and flies off the handle. We wind up finding out that the teacher has been really struggling with a hard time because the district has decided to eliminate all of the art and music teaching positions in schools because of budget cuts. Oh boy, having actually like been school age when this was going on and, you know, going into teaching now, this hurts my heart so much. And basically the teacher decides that, you know, as the sort of his response to none of the kids caring about this chorus holiday concert they're all supposed to do is to let the kids run the concert themselves. You know, he's getting laid off. He doesn't want to spend his last like months of work making a bunch of apathetic children care about putting on this show. And so, somewhat unsurprisingly, the kids all elect Hart Evans to be the leader of the like holiday concert planning. This really is a story about the difference between popularity and leadership and the kind of qualities that make a good leader. There's a lot of like really good and thoughtful back and forth where there's like humanization going on between student and teacher. One of the things I don't always love in kids' books is sometimes the adults are caricatures. That's kind of the point, you know, especially because you're a kid and, you know, you deserve to be able to read books that don't center adults. But I did really appreciate the relationship that Hart and the teacher, Mr. Minor, develop throughout the story. It's also funny. There's classic kid hijinks. As somebody that did chorus for many, many years, both in school and just like for fun as an extracurricular, there's a lot of good stuff that's like spot on about what it really takes to get a production like this off the ground. This is also definitely an ode to the power of music and art education in our schools and the importance of it. Unfortunately, in the 21 years since this book has been published, I don't know that things have necessarily gotten better with regards to that type of education. I do know we're seeing a lot of the detrimental effects of eliminating those positions and those programs from schools. So support your music and art educators where you can. Make music and art with the kids in your life. It's very important. It's kind of what we're here for, you know, as human beings. One of the things we're here to do, I firmly believe, is to make stuff, to express ourselves through art. And yeah, this very short little book had me thinking some big, deep thoughts about those kind of things. So definitely would recommend this, particularly if you have middle school kids in your life. Would be a good read for them. All right, next we have a sort of buddy read that I did with my friend Allie, whose channel is A Genteel Black Hole. I'll make sure that his stuff is linked. But we read The Wind's 12 Quarters by Ursula K. Le Guin together, and we discussed it just over DMs as we were progressing through this. The thing about being in a 3rd trimester of pregnancy is that you just don't sleep. The baby at this point is big enough and active enough that when she's awake, I'm awake. So there's a lot of like getting up and down in the middle of the night, and this book kind of became my companion for those really long nights. This is sort of a retrospective kind of short story anthology that Le Guin put together. So it seems like the first time this was published was 1987, but the edition I have was republished in 2022, and it has a lot of introductory notes from Le Guin in the front. I really enjoyed getting to read some of her early work. Particularly, the one that I liked a lot was April in Paris, which was like an interesting take on a time travel story, as well as the Dr. Faustus legend, or the Faust legend, which I got very into earlier this year. I also loved getting to revisit the world of Gethin, which is the planet from The Left Hand of Darkness, probably my favorite Le Guin book. And yeah, getting to just enjoy how incredibly this writer imagines fully realized worlds. I mean, I say that all the time, but like nobody does it like she does. There's a story that's told entirely from the perspective of a tree that is so unique. I've never read anything like it. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But once I did, my mind was like completely blown by how masterfully it was told. So yes, especially if you are a fan of Le Guin, definitely read this. But if you're looking to dip your toe into her work, there are a lot of really good quality stories here that you don't need to have prior experience reading her other works to enjoy. Okay, we had another buddy read that I did, which was The Cider House Rules by John Irving. Pat from Book Chat with Pat and a bunch of other booktubers were hosting this on Voxer. This was my first John Irving book that I've ever read, and I had such a bizarre time reading this. This is so strange. This is kind of a Bildungsroman in the tradition of some of your classic Victorian novels like David Copperfield and Jane Eyre, both of which are referenced extensively in here. But we follow our main character, Homer Wells, who is this young orphan growing up in an orphanage in rural Maine in the early 20th century. He has this like surrogate father figure, Dr. Larch, who is kind of the orphan master, but also a doctor that provides abortions to people who need to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason. And this is, of course, during a time when abortion is illegal. And because it's illegal, there's a lot of, really unsafe practices going on. So Larch prides himself on being able to provide this service. He sees it as like a moral and ethical duty, and he really wants to raise Homer up to do the same thing for him. Homer doesn't want to become a doctor. Homer has different opinions about, is a fetus alive? Does it have a soul? It gets very like philosophical, but in a way that also doesn't come across as overly like dogmatic. I don't think I've read a novel that treats abortion like this from the man's perspective in such a sympathetic way before. And also in a complex way, like recognizing that we maybe don't have the most black and white feelings about it. To be perfectly honest, I am still as pro-choice as they come, and carrying what is now my first pregnancy to term has only reinforced my belief that you absolutely should not be forced to carry a pregnancy to term if you don't want to. It's hard enough as it is. And it's dangerous, it's an inherently dangerous thing, even though we have lots of ability to mitigate that risk, and we have much better healthcare than they did during this time period. But the way that this was written was really a delight to read. It was very strange. There are a lot of very eccentric characters that do weird, out of the blue things, and Irving is just such a zany author. I didn't really know what to expect reading this, but we are going to be buddy reading Queen Esther, which is a prequel to this novel that just was released. This novel came out in, I believe, 1985, or was it 1987? 1985, right. So it's been years since it was last published, but we are going to be reading the prequel, and I know some people watched the movie. I haven't done that, but I think I will at some point. So I'd recommend it, but I would also be like, hey, this is a really weird book. It's not, I think, typical of what I usually read, so I'd still recommend it, but if you're like, oh, I'm doing it because Anna's tastes align with mine, it's not what I typically tend to read. All right, so let's finish up with the two nonfiction books that I read this month. One of them was a nonfiction November that I really wanted to get to. I've had this on my TBR for a long time. This is For Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World, Sasha Sagan. Sasha Sagan is the daughter of Carl Sagan and Andrew Yan, and she is a dramatic literature student, TV producer, filmmaker, editor, all around sort of just arts person. And she writes about growing up in a secular, very like science-focused household, which is very similar to the, household that I create and cultivate and live in now, but also that has like a very strong tradition of valuing ritual and the meaning that it brings to our lives, and also valuing a lot of the cultural practices that we can get from religion without necessarily believing in deities. And that's kind of what I'm all about, right? So like the way that she writes about Judaism in particular is interesting to me because we're Jewish, and People are always kind of surprised when I tell them, yes, I'm Jewish, but I don't believe in God. It's not like strictly required that you believe in God to be a Jew. It's just more about like how you live your life, the ethics you follow, and the cultural practices that you practice here. And she writes a lot about that and like how her family made meaning out of things that her ancestors did out of religion, but her family does now more out of like a humanistic spirit. So if you are, more humanistic or agnostic, atheist, this is a great book to read. Even if you're not, I think this is a great book for you to read because it's very thought-provoking in the way that it examines how we create these rituals out of things like following the seasons, our observations of nature, major human life cycle events that every culture has developed different practices surrounding. Really, really liked this book. This was a 5-star read for me, not just because of the subject matter, but because of how beautifully these essays are written and how she can get at such amazing things that will relate to your own life, even through her personal stories. All right, the last book was the group read for my nonfiction book club this past month, and that was Into Unknown Skies, An Unlikely Team, A Daring Race, and the First Flight Around the World by David K. Randall. I loved this book. I did not think I was going to like it. This is not the kind of thing that I probably would have picked up at all. Even though I am an inveterate dad book reader, this just wouldn't have like called my name if it hadn't been a book club pick. But oh my goodness, not only was this book full of so much fascinating information about the first flight around the world and kind of the birth of modern American aviation, both commercial and military aviation, it's also just a total thrill ride to read. The writing was so compelling. I hung on this like it was the most suspense-filled novel I ever read. So many things kept happening. It's like the race around the world begins, things start to go from bad to worse, and it just doesn't stop until these people get to the end. I learned so much about the history of American aviation. I was very surprised that I actually didn't know there was this entire aviation race around the world that happened in the time period between the two world wars, nor what it actually meant as not just an event for the people's countries that had pilots in the race, but also as like an international event at large. I was trying to think, and we talked about this in the book club discussion, is there anything that can kind of bring the international community together to just kind of root for people outside of nationality or creed or other types of difference? And the closest we could come to was the Olympics. But like even now, that's not exactly what I was trying to get at here. I'd recommend this book, honestly, to everyone. This is a great book to give as a gift, I think, especially if you don't know what the person's really into reading, because it's just so exciting. It's like, yes, definitely get this for your dad book friends, but get this for your people that like suspense. Get this for your people that love like a good dramatic yarn. Just go read it and then maybe go to like your aviation museum and see like just how ridiculous it was that they were able to fly around the world in these planes that were somewhat held together with like spit and glue, a wish and a prayer. Really enjoyed this book so much. And that is all that I have for you today for the November wrap up. I will be seeing you at some point in the new year. I don't have like a firm timeline because again, we're going at the pace of the new baby. And we will see when I have like time, energy, inclination to read, let alone film. But I'm not going anywhere. I will be back. So until the next time I see you, I hope that you are having a happy holiday season, whatever holidays you celebrate. And I also hope that the new year 2026 brings you all of your hopes and your dreams and just a better world for all of us, truly. I wish you well. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.